Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. Now, we have a very important topic to talk about, and that is this. What is the future role of journalism? Now, obviously, this is a very wide topic, and there's a lot of different things that we could talk about. But to simplify it, I have picked out two very specific trends that has a huge impact on this future. The first thing is this. News is becoming a standalone product. Now, wait a minute, you say, isn't it already a standalone product? No, it actually isn't. When you think about a newspaper today, whether it's print or digital, it's all based on a packaged model. So if you go out and think about a normal newspaper, what you see generally is something like this. You see that they are covering news, obviously, but they are also covering all kinds of things. And this was particularly important in the past when we looked at something like a print newspaper. A print newspaper had to have a lot of different elements to it in order to get people to buy it. So you would have news on the front page and in the front section, but then you would have a science section on Tuesday and a lifestyle sections on the Saturdays and a car section on Sundays. And every single day of the week, there will be something in the newspaper more than just news. And in the past, this was how you made a newspaper. This was what news was, and this was what people paid for. People didn't just pay for news, they paid for this. But here's the thing. Now that we have a different world, a world of the internet, a lot of these extra things have moved on to different channels. Let me give you a very simple example of this. Take something like a lifestyle. So newspapers are obviously covering this still today. This is from The Guardian. And don't get me wrong, these articles are brilliant. These are really good articles that The Guardian has written. But here's the question. If you are a person and you are truly interested in something like, say, plants or food or whatever, would you go to a newspaper to read that today? Or would you instead find someone on the internet who had that specific passion and were instead creating a more specific channel about that? Well, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to this person because while newspapers are covering these topics, it's not their primary focus and therefore they're not the best at it. And this is the change that we are now seeing. We are seeing this shift from a old world where the package was what made news valuable to a new world where the individual niches is made usable. So what every newspaper has to do now is to have to find a way to figure out how can we make news more valuable, but also how can we take these other things and put them into niches. The New York Times is a perfect example of this. In the past, the New York Times was just a newspaper like any other. It had news and then it had a section called New York Times Food. But what happened? Well, we all know what happened. They have later taken the food section, put it into a separate product, and now this separate product is responsible for 46% of all their new subscribers. Now, it's not just New York Times Cooking that's doing that, it's all their separate products, so also New York Times Crosswords and the gaming things and all the other things they're doing. But think about the significance of this. This means that news is now why people subscribe to the New York Times itself, and all these other things are separate products, separate niches that is not necessarily part of the package of news. They can be upsold, but they're not in the package. This is a problem when it comes to journalism, because in order to optimize for this, we need to dramatically enhance the way we do journalism. Because again, remember, in the past, people did not just buy news. They bought all these extra things that we did. But now that news is becoming a standalone product, our journalism, generally speaking, I'm sorry to say this, but it isn't good enough. And so we need to dramatically enhance the value of news so that people want to buy that as a standalone product. To do that, we need to focus on these four things. We need to dramatically increase the relevance that we have for the individual person. So random news, not as good. We have to increase the level of interest that the individual reader might have in a story. We might need to make news far more useful. So reading about stories that you can't do anything about, well, people are not going to pay for that. But if you can make things useful, if you can have something that actually impacts people's life, then they're going to pay for it. And we have to raise the level of personal concern. And I don't mean that we should create concern. I mean that we should address things that people are concerned about. We need to take whatever it is that we are doing today and basically take it 10 times higher in order to create news as a separate product. That is a big, big change to the future role of news. What we also need to do is we need to think about why people are paying. So are we addressing something people need, or are we addressing something people want to support? That too is a vital element of the future role of journalism, because we can't just write stories that is just news. We have to think about how does it relate to this. So that is the first trend that we see, that news is becoming a standalone product. Now the second big trend that we're seeing is this. We have three different things that we usually talk about when we talk about the future of journalism. That is solution journalism, entrepreneurial journalism, and project journalism. Not many people know what project journalism is, but I'll get to that. Here's the thing. We can basically blame Google for all of this. You see, what happened was that before Google, all of media was passive. It didn't matter whether you had a newspaper or a magazine or a radio station or a TV station. All of them was based on the concept that you would sit down in your couch and then you would just have it broadcast to you. When you are sitting with a print newspaper, you literally have no idea what is on the next page as you flip through it. You don't know, because in the old days, news was just broadcast to you. There was no specific intent or focus behind it. But Google, bad Google, they changed all that. Because Google came along and they said, well, instead of just giving people random things, why don't we ask people what they actually need and then try to give them that? So if you want to know something specific, like what is the latest COVID numbers, then you could just go and search for him. I'm not saying Google is good for that, but that's the point. Google is active. They have created a media model where instead of having things flown to you, you just have a need and you go to it to figure out what that answer is. And that is what we then see with solution journalism. Because this doesn't impact search, this impacts the way people think of media in general. What we see here is an example from Nieman Lab. It's a great article they posted a couple of weeks ago. And it talks about how kids are going back to school in the US and how parents have a million questions. But, as you can see, the local newspapers, they're not answering those questions, because the local newspapers are just focusing on reporting whatever news that happened that day. They're not thinking about their readers as someone who has a need. They're just thinking about a newspaper as something that has to report whatever news that is coming that day. This is the problem. This is the change that we're seeing. The public today demand that news has a form of usefulness and that it's something that is providing answers and solutions to what we need. So let's quickly just talk about these three different concepts. We have solution journalism. Now, solution journalism is all about providing the answers. So if people have a question, if people have a need, if people have a problem, then as news, it's not our job to just report about it. It's our job to actually figure out how do we do something about it. That is, again, really big change in the way we think about journalism. The second thing is entrepreneurial journalism. Entrepreneurial journalism is about providing the tools. Again, this is something traditional journalism is not really thinking about because we're just writing stories. But we've seen so many examples over recent years of the public actually needing specific things in order to get things done, in order to understand things in the world. We've seen some improvements about this in relation to COVID, where we actually seen newspapers provide tools related to that, but we're still far behind on this. So this is an area where we also need to dramatically enhance the way we do things. And then, of course, we have project journalism. This is a very controversial one because project journalism is about getting people from A to B. In traditional journalism, we would say, no, we can't do that. We can't show people the way. We can't get people. This is too much like campaigning or things like that. But that's not what this is. The best example we have right now is something like climate change. We know climate change is a problem. We know that we need to do something, and we know we need to do it quickly. And so we have a goal that by, say, 2030, we need to be at a specific point. And so as journalists, we now have a choice. We can either just try to be nobody and just report what is happening, not caring about whether we actually reach that outcome or not. Or as journalists, we could say, well, at the year 2030, we need to be here. Right now, we are here. So how can we get there? And then we align our journalism in focusing on that. And don't be wrong, I'm not talking about things in terms of political bias or anything. This is not about that. This is about a societal goal. That is what we need to do here. And this trend, this is a very problematic thing to think about, but this trend is dramatically changing the future of journalism. And every single journalist, every single newspaper will have to think about this in the next 10 years. So those are the two biggest trends that we see at the moment. And big changes are coming. But thank you for listening.